My keycard beeped low as I pushed open the door, the familiar click echoing down the hallway like an accusation. It was barely past 4, earlier than I ever left the office, but something about the heavy August air had pressed me home. The scent of warm asphalt still clung to my silk blouse, and the straps of my heels had left faint indents on my ankles. The living room lights glowed against the late-day sun spilling through the blinds, but it wasn't the gentle hush of home that greeted me. Instead, the scrape of cardboard against wood. My breath caught. There, bent over my open dresser drawers, stood my parents. My mother's silver bob swayed as she folded my sweaters into a moving box, the one I'd stored in the closet for winter clothes. My father was taping another box shut, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration, as though this was any other Saturday chore. "Mom," my voice cracked sharper than I intended. They both jerked around. My mother's hands froze mid-fold, the soft blush cardigan dangling from her fingers. "Sweetheart," she began, tone too sweet, "we just thought we'd help you get ready. For the move." The move. I stepped forward, pulse thrumming against my wristwatch. Dad cleared his throat. "Into that cozy little studio we found. It'll be easier for you. Less rent, less pressure." The air smelled faintly of the lavender sachets I kept in the drawers, now crushed between layers of someone else's decision. I tightened my grip on the leather strap of my bag, the edges digging into my palm. So this was how they planned to help me. By packing up my life while I wasn't looking. I wasn't always the woman who wore quiet confidence like a second skin. 3 years ago, I was just Olivia Hayes, a 22-year-old who thought she'd finally earned a place in her parents' world. I'd graduated with honors, landed a job interview at a boutique design firm in Portland, and even saved enough to rent a tiny apartment near the river. But the night before I was supposed to move, our kitchen turned into a war zone. Mom's pearls clicked against the edge of her wineglass as she said, "Liv, you're making a mistake. That studio is a glorified closet. You'll come crawling back in a month." Dad barely looked up from his laptop. "Graphic design isn't a career. It's a hobby that pays in exposure. You need something stable like accounting or law school." Their words sliced through me like paper cuts, small but relentless. I felt the lump rising in my throat, the sting behind my eyes. My hands trembled so badly, I gripped the back of a chair just to stay steady. "I'm not asking for your approval," I managed, my voice wobbling despite every ounce of pride I had. "I'm telling you I'm moving." Mom's sigh carried more disappointment than any shouted insult. "You'll regret this, Olivia. We're only trying to help." Help. That word tasted bitter. I turned away before they could see the tears threatening to spill. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears, but beneath the fear, something stronger ignited, a flicker of resolve I'd never felt before. As I slipped upstairs to pack the last of my things, I passed my grandmother's cedar chest in the hallway. She'd passed away when I was 16, but her presence still lingered in the soft scent of lavender that seeped from the wood. I opened the chest, and there it was, the delicate silver compass she'd given me the summer before she died. Its face was scratched from decades of use, the needle quivering as if it sensed my turmoil. I remembered her words, whispered during a long afternoon of porch swings and iced tea. "When you feel lost, Livy, remember, your true north is never where they tell you to go. It's where your heart points." I slipped the compass into my pocket like a lifeline. That night, while the house slept, I loaded the last box into my dented hatchback. My breath came in shaky bursts, but the weight of the compass steadied me. I wasn't just leaving home. I was stepping toward a life no one in that house believed I could build. And I promised myself, as the taillights disappeared down the quiet street, that I'd never let their doubt become my truth. When I left that night, my car felt more like a lifeboat than a vehicle. The highway stretched like a dark ribbon under the pale moonlight, and with every mile I put between myself and my parents' house, the knot in my chest loosened just a fraction. I kept replaying the scene in my head, Mom's tight smile, Dad's clipped words, until their voices blurred into the hum of the tires. I landed in Chicago with 2 suitcases and a bank account that barely covered a month's rent. The studio I found was hardly bigger than the bedroom I'd just been helped out of. The cracked radiator rattled like a teapot ready to boil over, and the only window overlooked an alley that smelled like yesterday's pizza boxes. But for the first time in my life, the key in my hand opened a door that was truly mine. The first weeks were a blur of job applications and rejections. I poured coffee in a corner cafe at dawn, then hustled to a marketing internship that paid in little more than exposure. I lived on instant noodles and the occasional splurge of a $4 latte when I needed to remember what hope tasted like. That hope came unexpectedly one evening when my mentor, Julia Ramirez, stayed late to review a campaign pitch I had quietly worked on after hours. Julia was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying, her silver-streaked hair swept into a knot, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. "You've got something here, Nicole," she said, tapping the storyboard with her red pen. "Not just talent, instinct. Don't waste it." Those words were a lifeline. I started spending nights at the office, teaching myself the design software no one had time to train me on. My fingers grew calloused from the mouse, my back ached from the stiff office chair, but with every draft my confidence hardened into something unshakable. Julia introduced me to her network, and soon a small local business hired me to create their entire rebrand. When they handed me my first check, 3 times what I earned in a month at the cafe, I nearly cried into my takeout noodles. The wins came in increments, a freelance contract here, a referral there. I left the cafe, then the internship. I moved from the studio to a 1-bedroom with creaky wooden floors and light that pooled golden across the walls at sunset. But I kept my success quiet. Whenever Mom called, I mentioned only that work was fine. Dad would ask if I was making enough to scrape by. I'd give a vague yes. They still thought I lived in that tiny studio, thought I'd barely made ends meet. And maybe part of me liked it that way. I wanted the unveiling to be on my terms, when my life was something no one could dismiss. By the time I signed the lease on my own design agency's downtown loft, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the river glinting like liquid silver, I knew I had built something they would never have imagined for me. Something I almost hadn't imagined for myself. When the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, the hush of my private floor felt almost theatrical. The faint scent of gardenias from the arrangement in the foyer lingered in the air, my small indulgence after a string of 12-hour days. I stepped out first, my heels clicking against the marble like a metronome of quiet confidence. Behind me, my parents hesitated. The sound of my father clearing his throat, once a subtle signal of authority, now felt like an awkward attempt to fill the silence. "Is this all yours?" my mother finally asked, her voice trembling as she took in the sweeping view of the Manhattan skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sunset brushed the city in gold, and the Empire State Building gleamed like a promise I'd kept to myself. "Yes," I said simply. I let the word breathe, the way my mentor once taught me to do, when closing a deal. No need to gild it with explanations. My father's eyes darted across the open-plan office suite, polished oak desks, framed contracts on the wall, a small gallery of photographs from launches and charity galas. He lingered on the custom plaque by the door. Olivia Bennett, founder and CEO. He blinked. CEO. The syllables barely left his lips. I walked toward the center of the room, running my fingers lightly across the edge of the grand conference table. "For the last 4 years," I replied, keeping my voice level. "The company you once said was a cute side project now employs 78 people. My mother's hand tightened around the strap of her handbag. We thought you were still in that tiny apartment in Queens." "That was 3 years ago," I said, meeting her gaze. "I didn't think you'd be interested in the upgrade." The pause stretched. The city below pulsed with life, but up here, the air carried only the quiet hum of disbelief. Dad finally stepped forward, peering at the framed magazine cover on the credenza, Tech Innovator of the Year. My photo smiled back, the headline bold and impossible to ignore. "I don't understand," he said, voice low. "We thought you needed help that you couldn't possibly handle." "Handle what?" I cut in gently, not sharply, but firmly enough to stop the sentence from spilling into old assumptions. "A life without your plan for me?" My mother flinched, guilt flickering across her face. "Olivia, We only wanted what was best. You wanted what was best for the version of me you imagined, I said. Not the woman standing here. The words came easier than I'd expected. Years of swallowing them had made me think they'd turn to stone, but now they flowed like a river finally breaking free. Dad exhaled, his shoulders sagging. He looked around the office again, this time slower, taking in the curated art, the soft leather chairs, the glass awards that caught the evening light. His silence carried more weight than any argument we'd ever had. You built all this alone? He asked finally. I built it with people who believed I could, I said. People who didn't measure my worth by how closely I followed their blueprint. The last sliver of sunlight bathed the room in copper. My mother's eyes shone, not just with surprise, but with something that looked like reluctant admiration. I walked to the window and placed a hand against the cool glass. I didn't invite you here to gloat, I said quietly. I invited you to see me, the real me, because you can't keep packing up my life like it's something fragile that needs your approval to exist. A long silence settled, broken only by the muted buzz of a city below. Then my father, voice thick, whispered, "We were wrong." I turned, meeting their eyes, finally, unflinchingly. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of their expectations lift like a storm clearing from the horizon. I rested my palms against the cool marble of my kitchen island, letting the silence stretch. The only sound was the distant hum of the sub-zero fridge and the soft tick of the wall clock, each second winding the tension tighter. My parents stood at the far end of the open-plan room, still clutching their handbags as if they needed something solid to hold on to. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a panorama of the life they had once insisted I could never have. I drew in a breath and let my voice come out calm, even warm. I didn't bring you here to embarrass you, but there are things we need to settle before we can even talk about the future. My mother's fingers trembled against her pearls. My father's jaw flexed. Neither spoke. I'm willing to help you, I continued, but only if we're clear on what that means. I looked first at my father. Dad, you need to let go of the idea that control equals love. When you packed my things to help me move into that tiny studio, you weren't helping, you were pushing me out. If you want a relationship with me now, you'll need to respect my choices without the constant staring. His eyes flicked to the skyline, then back to me. He gave a barely perceptible nod. I turned to my mother. And, Mom, you have to stop apologizing for me. For my ambition. For my independence. I'm not a phase you have to explain away at church or to your friends. I need you to celebrate me without disclaimers. Her lips parted as if to protest, then closed again. I straightened, my voice softening but firm. I will help you downsize. I'll even invest in the small house you want back in Connecticut. But it comes with the condition weekly dinners. Here or there. And not the kind where we sit in polite silence. Real dinners. We talk. We listen. We start over. The tick of the clock filled the air again. My father cleared his throat, rough and low. And if we fail? Then, I said gently, I'll keep living my life. You'll always be my parents, but I won't keep reopening wounds that you won't help heal. For a long moment, no one moved. Then my mother stepped forward. Her hand, cool, tentative, found mine across the marble. Claire, she whispered, voice cracking, we want that chance. My chest tightened. After all the years of silence, the words settled like a fragile truce. I squeezed her hand, feeling the smallest shift of power. Not the dominance I once thought I wanted, but the quiet strength of someone who finally owns her story. I didn't see my parents for nearly 3 weeks after that night. When Mom finally called, her voice held a softness I hadn't heard since childhood, like the hushed tone she used to sing me to sleep with.
"Can we visit?" she asked.
No preamble, no defensiveness. Just that. When they arrived, the autumn air had already started to taste like cinnamon and wood smoke. My townhouse smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee and the lavender candle flickering on the entry table. Mom set down a small basket of apples, our old family tradition after the first fall harvest, and Dad lingered awkwardly near the doorway. I noticed the difference right away. Dad's shoulders weren't squared in that stubborn way anymore. They sloped, humbled. Mom's eyes searched mine as if asking for silent permission. I started volunteering at the community center, Mom said, settling on the sofa, helping girls with their college applications. I should have been the one cheering you on back then. Dad cleared his throat, a little rough. I enrolled in a woodworking class. The instructor says I'm not half bad. I needed something to build that wasn't just my opinion of how you should live. A gentle warmth spread through me, quiet but sure. It wasn't triumph. It was something deeper, recognition maybe. On the coffee table sat the little silver compass my college roommate, Mariah, had given me when I left home. Find your true north, she'd engraved on the back. I picked it up, rolling the cool metal between my fingers. You both found something that's yours, I said softly. That's all I ever wanted, for us to respect each other's paths. Mom's eyes glistened. Dad gave a small, almost sheepish nod. We talked for hours, about the studio apartment I never had to move into, about the business I built from scratch, about the nights I doubted myself, but kept going anyway. They listened this time. Really listened. As dusk settled, the first stars pierced the fading sky. I walked them to the door, the compass still in my hand. When Mom hugged me, her whisper brushed my ear. We're proud of you, Chloe. I stepped back, smiled, and finally slipped the compass into my coat pocket. Its weight felt less like a burden now, and more like a quiet promise. My true north, I said, almost to myself, was never a place. It was becoming the woman I am today.